Detective Sarah Mills stood at the entrance of Rosebrook Manor's famous garden, her keen eyes scanning the perfectly trimmed hedges and colorful flower beds. The usually peaceful garden had become a crime scene overnight. The garden's elderly caretaker, Mr. Thompson, had disappeared, leaving behind only his mud-covered gardening tools and a mysterious note. "Found anything interesting?" asked Officer Pete Roberts, walking up behind her. Sarah knelt beside a rose bush, examining broken stems and disturbed soil. "Something's not right here, Pete." Mr. Thompson had worked in this garden for 30 years. He wouldn't just abandon it. The garden was known throughout the small town of Millbrook for its beauty and serenity. Mr. Thompson had devoted his life to maintaining its perfection, even after the death of the manor's owner, Mrs. Eleanor Rosebrook, 2 years ago. Sarah pulled out the note found near the tool shed. Written in shaky handwriting were the words, "The roses know. Night blooms reveal truth." Below the message was a roughly drawn symbol of a crescent moon. "Seems like nonsense to me," Pete said, shaking his head. Maybe the old man finally lost it. But Sarah wasn't convinced. She had known Mr. Thompson since childhood, when she would watch him tend to the gardens while her mother worked as a maid in the manor. He was eccentric, but sharp as a tack. As she walked deeper into the garden, she noticed something peculiar. Among the red roses were scattered white petals, but there were no white roses in this section. Following the trail of petals, she reached the garden's central fountain. The fountain had stopped working years ago, its stone cherubs covered in moss. Sarah circled it slowly, her flashlight beam catching something metallic at the bottom of the dry basin. Reaching down, she pulled out an old key with an ornate handle. "Pete, come look at this," she called out. But before Pete could reach her, a shadow moved between the hedges. Sarah spun around, but whoever it was had vanished. That night, Sarah returned to the garden alone. The note mentioned night blooms, and she remembered Mr. Thompson once telling her about special roses that only opened under moonlight. As the full moon rose, she noticed certain roses beginning to unfold their petals. They were planted in an unusual pattern. Taking out her notebook, she quickly sketched their positions. When connected, the flowers formed an arrow pointing toward the manor's old greenhouse. The greenhouse glass was clouded with age, but Sarah could make out shapes inside. Using the key from the fountain, she unlocked the door. The air inside was thick with the scent of earth and decay. Her flashlight beam revealed rows of dead plants, except for one corner where fresh dirt had been recently turned. A soft sound made her freeze. "Mr. Thompson? Detective Mills." The voice came from behind a large planter. Mr. Thompson emerged, looking tired but unharmed. "I knew you'd figure it out. What's going on? Why are you hiding here?" The old gardener sighed. "I discovered something while replanting the rose beds last week. Something Mrs. Rosebrook had buried years ago." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were old photographs and documents. Sarah's eyes widened as she read them. They revealed that Mrs. Rosebrook had evidence of corruption involving several prominent town officials, blackmail material she had collected over the years. "When I found these, they started watching the garden," Mr. Thompson explained. "I've seen them at night with their flashlights. I knew I had to protect these documents until I could trust someone with them. You were always a clever girl, Sarah. I left clues I knew only you would understand." The next day, Sarah presented the evidence to the police chief. 3 town council members were arrested for corruption and fraud. Mr. Thompson returned to his beloved garden, and Sarah often visited him there, helping tend to the roses that had helped solve the mystery. The garden kept other secrets too, but those would stay buried beneath the roses, known only to the flowers that bloomed under the moon's watchful eye. As Sarah sat on a garden bench weeks later, watching Mr. Thompson teach her about proper rose pruning, she smiled. Sometimes the quietest places held the loudest secrets, and it took a patient heart and keen eye to hear what they had to say. She had learned that gardens, like mysteries, required careful tending. Both needed time to reveal their secrets, and both bloomed most beautifully when given the right amount of attention and care. The old fountain bubbled with fresh water now, its cherubs cleaned and restored. Sarah had insisted on fixing it as a thank you to Mr. Thompson. Its gentle splash added new music to the garden silence, a reminder that even the quietest places had stories to tell if one only knew how to listen. And in the heart of the garden, the special night blooming roses continued their silent watch, keeping safe whatever secrets still lay buried beneath their roots, waiting for the next mystery to unfold in the silent garden of Rosebrook Manor.